Okay, so previously I mentioned when doing the outer rocker, it is it's absolutely critical that you mount your door. However, some people say that, and I don't know their experience, which may be true if you're a professional body guy, but I think for most of us, it is very important that you have your fender mounted also. Now, some people will say you can adjust the fender after, but in my humble opinion, for most people's purposes, you really need to have the fender mounted. And the reason for that is this bottom curve on your fender. Now, it may not be as important if you aren't doing a total replacement of a rocker panel, which I haven't been in that situation before. But as far as replacement rocker panels, this edge right here doesn't exactly match, or at least it didn't on the other side, that lower section of the fender. So I'm going to take this contour blade, that is the contour of the rocker panel. So what I'm going to do is trace that on this piece of paper, and we're going to compare them. We're going to compare that with the lower door. So hopefully you can see this, but the pencil, ignore this little bleed through. The pencil marking is the aftermarket rocker panel curve. The purple Sharpie, which may look black on this camera, is the fender. So this is what I mean by the difference in the curves. So we will go ahead and put on the rocker, just place it on the truck, and see what it looks like at that curve and at the cab corner. All right. So this metal spacer that I have between the rocker and the door is, I made two of those to match the gap that I wanted on the other side, which I mentioned was roughly the thickness of a carpenter's pencil. Sometimes these rockers, I don't know if it happens in the manufacturing process when they take them off the stamp, or if it happens in shipping, but essentially what I have noticed is the bottom of this rocker is actually squished together, if you will. Like if I were to put my hand on the rocker and squish it in, that's kind of how they come out of the shipping box. And before I shoved this wedge in here, this curve was way off. I mean, I showed you the paper, which showed how much it was off, but now with that wedge in there, which effectively stretched out this bottom piece down, the curve is very close. I mean, I don't think you're going to get any closer on any aftermarket panel. I mean, it's dead nuts. That's a little bit of filler to even it out between the panels, and that's it. Now, depending on how particular you are being, you can see there that really what needs to happen is this needs to get tweaked in a little bit, which is easily done by cutting a splice here and just tweaking it over. Now, looking down the rest of the door, it's hard to get the angle right on the camera. Let me see if I can get it right here. So if we get it right, almost, it's too hard to get in the camera, but essentially looking down, this right in here is out just barely. I mean, that's just a simple small splice cut, tuck it in and weld it up. And that is it until here, which ignore the rusted out door. You can see it best right there. So the same thing needs to happen right in here to bring this out to match the cab corner. And the curve going down from the cab corner is a little bit off right there. But I think that is because I need to trim. Let's see. That little piece sticking out right there. I need to trim this down. Because what I am going to do is, I mentioned this before, I don't like how this comes to a V. I want the same gap. That was my tape breaking. I want the same gap all the way down my door line and all the way down to the bottom. Before I start doing any of that work, I want to get this piece held in place with self-tapping screws. And right now, that's kind of difficult to do because this wedge is putting the panel in a position where I probably can't get it to stay with self-tapping screws. So I'll go ahead and open this door. So interestingly enough, what I think we are going to do is I am going to put a self-tapping screw right up here in that rocker and see where we're at. What I'm going to do to get that self-tapping screw positioned where I want it is I just clamped the rocker where I want it, or where it will be close enough for now. So now, as I expected, we clamped it where it needed to be up against the pillar, but this came back up. So we'll see what we got. The bottom doesn't want to come down anymore without tweaking this whole thing up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to splice this edge, and I think I'm going to splice in here because I can't push this I can't push this part of the panel down anymore on the pillar because this is pinching it. I think I'm gonna have to splice that part in order to get this end of the panel down. We'll see real quick. I just have the other side taped up, so it's sometimes a pain to deal with. So I'm going to take that self-tapping screw out. And see, if you shut your door a little bit, usually you can wedge this outer rocker up into place, even with the door and the fender on. What I did there was screw it back into place so I can mark where it is and more easily tell how much distance I've actually moved it, because we want to move it down. Now we'll unscrew it. So what I'm going to do now is split this and split right in here to see if this part will come out towards you and let us push this down farther on the pillar. Okay, so I made those two cuts I told you I was going to make. I put the rocker back up on the truck and just taped the back side up against the pillar. I didn't screw the side back in. Then I pushed it down just to make sure that those cuts would allow that piece against the pillar over here to expand and let it go down farther, which it did. So then I closed the door and put my spacer in place. And now the problem is I don't have a way with the fender on to put a self-tapper into that side of the rocker to get this held into place down here. Because you can't, there's no way to get anything easily from the inside with the door closed back down in there. So now what I'm going to do is take the fender off, and hopefully we can get a self-tapper against the back flange on the rocker panel. Okay, so now what is revealed with the fender off is down here it's right up against the pillar. But up top you can see that there's about a 1/4 inch gap right here. So what I'm going to do first is put a self-tapping screw here, and then I'm going to cut a splice right here, because we will cut this splice and then tweak that whole part in, and then we should be able to get another self-tapping screw back up here in the top, all with this spacer right here underneath the door. Then once we have both those self-tapping screws in place, we can pull this out, open the door, and see where we're at, and probably tweak the other end, the rear end of the rocker down there, to put some self-tapping screws in it. Okay, so I did make the 2 cuts on the inside of the pillar. You can see the first one at the tip of my finger, which allowed me to push this rocker panel down. You can see that line was the reference line I previously marked. Then I came down here and I put that self-tapping screw into place, and meanwhile I had the spacer. The door was shut, and I can't shut it now because I got that clamp there, but the door was shut and I had the spacer between the door and the rocker. So then what I did is I came back inside and saw that this rocker had really bent out. So I got it clamped, and I clamped this up against there. You can see that other cut I made that I told you about right here and on the edge. So then I clamped it, and then I came back out here, made sure my wedge would fit in the door like that, and then after I cut a slit down and a slit across, I bent this piece out and took my body hammers and started down here and beat that into where I want it, and then this I could just push up with my finger. So drilled a new hole, put another self-tapper in. This butt plate I'm not too worried about. This is here just to keep it in place for me. Once I'm all done putting the rocker in, I'll make a solid end cap like I did. Right there. So now what I need to do is put a hole on this front plate right here of the rocker to kind of help hold it in place up against this, so I don't have to have the clamp there, because right now I can't close the door. So I will go ahead and do that. We'll close the door and make sure everything's still kosher on this side. Okay, so once again we've kind of got a peculiar situation to do this next step. I've got my spacer in place with the door partially shut to make sure I can get enough of that edge on there. Make sure it's got the proper spacing. I've got the back of the rocker still taped up, which, by the way, it's not quite the happiest camper in that situation. It falls all the time. You can see that I ended up cutting down even farther along that little body line, or the stamp line, in order to allow the panel or the rocker to split apart more up at the top. And with the door in this situation, you're really limited on access. So with the right side clamped up against the door jamb, I drilled the hole, and you can see the head, hopefully, of the self-tapping screw right in there, and it should be pretty well held in place now. You can watch as I take this clamp off. It didn't move very much at all. Actually, that's pretty close to where it needs to be. And eventually I'll probably put another self-tapping screw in from that direction to hold that up in place. So now the door should be able to shut, which it did, and we still have the gap. Now, you can tell that it's a pretty close tolerance. So we'll pull this spacer out, and it didn't move too much, not enough for the naked eye to ever be able to tell for a body gap. And the forward end of our outer rocker is where it needs to be. So now we move on to the rear section. And now is probably when I need to go ahead and cut off that lip inside of there. I think what I'll go ahead and do is make a splice right up in that area to push the bottom end over. That way it has clearance for me to fit this up properly. So I cut that splice out to make some room to get this rocker where I wanted it as far as the curve and the body line. And the first place I'm going to put a screw to hold this panel is going to be right along here into the pillar, or right here from that side. I'll worry about that inside part last. It's a little ways away. And on the other side, I had to split that and veer it over, so I'm not too worried about that. Once I cut this kind of V shape out over here and can tweak this over, what may end up happening is I might have to make a cut over here to bring this back piece over. But we'll just have to see what we're looking like after I cut this out and see how much the metal wants to move for me.